Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is Professor Hamamoto, and the date is August 2nd, 2026, 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Today, I have an exciting talk for you, prepared, editing to the very last moment. I just had enough time to go downstairs and get myself a can of cold jasmine tea. This is from Japan, by the way. Itoen is the brand. And I just mention it because it's a really good drink for it's non-caffeinated, non-sweetened, of course, right? This is Japanese tea. But it's really good for hot summer days. Another good drink I can recommend in addition to jasmine green tea is what's called a mugi cha. And mugi is barley tea, cold, on ice or just chilled. It's very, very good for hot summer days wherever you are in the world. In Japan, in particular, it's very, very humid. Mushiatsui, it's called humidity, right? So I'll be taking sips of this drink periodically to clear my throat. As I deliver this talk to you today on, well, it's about me. I wrote myself into the title. How about that? Seems to be a typical pattern in most of my talks. And I'm talking about growing up in the post-war, post-nuclear age. Yes, I'm a boomer. I grew up in fear of annihilation by the A-bomb. Right, I was going to get deeply into that in this talk today. Then it started to change focus, and I thought I would talk more today about the director Honda Ishiro. It's pronounced Honda, ladies and gentlemen, not Honda. Honda. And I would give this book a 5-star recommendation. It's an academic, well, let me clarify that. It's by an academic publisher, Wesleyan University Press, but it's not one of these turgid so-called film studies, cultural studies, theoretical tomes. You forget what you're studying very quickly when you are off into the tall weeds of so-called big theory with a capital T. That's what was plaguing well, it still is really, but it really plagued the university when I was coming up. It was just starting to kick in. And they had about a 30-year run or so in dominating the discourse in the academic world. And this is when you started to get the whole GLBTQ and feminist post-structural theory. I won't get into it because this material has been critiqued enough by all the Johnny-come-latelys on TubeView. Notice how many more academics are coming on TubeView recently? Very recent. Some of them are even fake professors. You know who I am, that clown, ass clown professor. So I mention this because I'm staking my turf. And I'm also taking my turf today when I'm speaking of Godzilla studies, Gojira studies, because as I've told you before, and most recently last week, I've been doing this for decades now. That is popular culture studies. And I'll give you an update. I got a notification the other day that my diploma order has been received. It's being processed. I think they're going to put it in a nice little binder and folder. It's good quality paper. I probably have to print it up individually on good quality sheepskin, maybe not literally sheepskin, but paper of that quality from Bowling Green State University, Ohio. And it's going to have my name on there, and it's going to say Master of Arts, Popular Culture. Okay, I'm going to show you the degree right here on this channel. God willing, hopefully I'm still around and we haven't been put to rest through World War III. which is another reason why I'm doing this talk. This is the run up to the nuking of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And of course, Japan was attacked a third time. It's called Fukushima, although it's not conceptualized as such or understood as such. But Japan was attacked for a third time. That's another discussion, and people have begun doing alternative research on that. What you're hearing about, or what you've heard about for the past years, well, since the very beginning, is mostly lies, propaganda, diversion. Anyway, the point is that Japan has been under nuclear attack numerous times. It's the only country that is with offensive weapons. We're under attack with nuclear weapons, but it's more like slow release into the atmosphere, atmospheric testing. The downwinders of Utah, northern Nevada, they are victims of the nuclear weapons complex. This is what I'm referring to when I put in my title the Godzilla-Industrial complex, right? That includes you, many of your relatives, maybe you yourself. I had a professor at the University of California, Irvine. I'll give you his name because I'd like to pay homage to him, Professor Joseph G. Jorgensen, who was a downwinder. He grew up in that part of Utah, southern Utah, and caught a lot of the open-air atmospheric testing going on in the state of Nevada. And I don't need to go into that. Most of you know that at least the basics of atmospheric and underground nuclear testing that have been going on almost continuously supposedly since the end of World War II. Right. So it's a huge topic, and I can't promise to even scratch the surface here. I'm only going to be talking about one particular angle, and it's an autobiographical angle. It is how did myself, Professor Hamamoto, whose childhood hero is Dr. Serizawa. He's the person on the pick for this show today. Dr. Serizawa. Right. Remember that gripping scene at the very end of Godzilla? Both versions, both the white man's version and the yellow man's version. Right. I grew up with the white man's version. I grew up with the Jewish Hollywood version of Godzilla, the Jewish edit. Right. We've been edited out of the history. Right. And I'm going to talk about that because I grew up in LA. And well, I'll tell you right now, the reason why I was able to escape the brutal erasure of me, myself, my people, my history is because we had our own network of theaters, we being the Nikkei community. Nikkei is overseas Japanese people. Okay, you're familiar with the concept of Italian Americans, Irish Americans, Armenian Americans. Well, all the hyphenate groups, Japanese people had a large immigrant population. Chinese, of course, all the groups have fairly large communities overseas. And in Japanese, it's referred to Nikkei. And for a long time, the Japanese people themselves never really recognized it. They had their own lives to live, but they understand now Japan, Japanese people, the yellow world more in a global world systems sense that I have been promoting for much of my career after I abandoned so-called Asian Americans. I also don't use the term Japanese American because that's been hijacked. That's been hijacked by people like Norman Mineta, right? You remember 9/11? He was in the Presidential Executive Center with Dick Cheney, right? That guy, Norman Mineta, he's from San Jose, right? He was a kingpin of the so-called Japanese American Citizens League. And I'm not going to go off on them right now. But I'm just mentioning their name, their title, that organization, and at least one individual, Norman Mineta, who was conveniently the Secretary of Transportation when 9/11 went down. I'm just mentioning people like that just to prove my or to establish my point why I'm using a different terminology. All right. I'm also staking my claim not as the pioneer of Godzilla studies. I think you might say that, I mean, Godzilla study, how can you study a fictional character? Well, it's not fiction, for one thing, which I'll establish today. It manifested itself in fiction, but the premise of Godzilla or Gojira, as it says in Japanese, is rooted in history, not book learning history, but lived, actually existing history. Respect that. You respect it. You don't have to American history, right? Let's just start locally here with American history. And I mention this because, or I stress this is because we are systematically taught to blank out on historical memory purposely. So we're always caught on the back heels, and every time a new revelation comes out, we're going to think it's novel, it's unique, and we're helpless to do anything about it. That's part of the historical amnesia process that you're taught in school. Definitely, and you're taught in the popular culture how to forget. Well, today we're going to remember, but we're going to show you that remembering is a lot. It's a challenge. It's exciting. It's even fun. Yes, Godzilla is fun. I recognize that. But at the same time, I do not want to leave Godzilla to the weebs, to the weeaboos, to the so-called Japanophiles, to the newbies, to the people who are now telling me that my parent culture, although I'm really American. I'm third generation American. Now it's okay. The white man says that we can eat sushi now. We could eat a Japanese food, or we call it Nihon ryori. We don't call it Japanese food. We call it food. All right. And by the same token, that they give me permission, the yellow man, to to be interested in Gojira or Godzilla. Well, I've been there and I've done that, and I'm going to tell you a lot about, probably more than you want to know. There's going to be a lot of gossip in here too about some characters that people think they know about, but they don't know them as well as I do. Like, to the point of being friends with them, being in their apartments, being with them in more casual, intimate circumstances, as opposed to just reading their books or seeing them in the movies or watching their films or documentaries. All right. And that doesn't make me better than you. That only makes me a more serious student of the topic, because I went to Japan to follow up on my childhood exposure and interest in Gojira. Because, like a lot of people of my generation, I grew up being exposed for the first time to Godzilla, the King of the Monsters, the Jewish version, not the Japanese version. I have to stress Jewish because, Chaim Saban is a Jew. He's the guy that took a Japanese product, the Power Rangers, and made them into white people in his version of it, and made a fortune of it. He says, "Oh, great. We don't have to see the Japanese yellow people because they have helmets on. So we'll have the black boy, and we'll have the white guy and the other white person. Oh, yeah, there is a yellow girl, and she's the yellow Mighty Morphin Rain." So this is why I make this distinction. I don't want to blame all white people. I'm talking about Hollywood here, okay? Let's be real. And I've been doing talks for the last few weeks on people like Michael Ovitz, Mr. Shelterek, David Geffen. Last week, I talked about the role of Hollywood in Israel nation building, right? So I've been working our way up to this process right here, right? And I'm talking about an industry here that is hurting us into World War III. I'm not going to go any further than that because I want this show to remain up. All right. And you know which foreign power is behind all that. And you know by now which industry has been promoting this. The New York Slimes, the print, whatever is left of print media, all the way to so-called indie media, which has been infiltrated by a bunch of foreign agents they might be Americans, they might be Canadians, but they're on the payroll of foreign agents. And it's not the Chacoms either. All right. So anyway, let me begin by giving people who are uninitiated to the Godzilla studies, and this is a resource for you as well. Criterion Films. I've mentioned them before. They're in New York City, and it's a small company. I think I don't know if it's for profit or not, but it's probably, for my money, the single most important distributor, manufacturer, promulgator of quality films, film art, let's say. And I'm not looking down my nose at all the crappy pop movies that come out. I watch a lot of them myself. I study the popular culture. I got over my snobbishness between elite culture and pop moronic culture a long time ago. I just look at it as one complete entity. But Criterion Films is where you want to go to, especially where we're talking about the Japanese film, both the golden age of Japanese cinema, and we'll be talking about one of the premier critics. He's dead now, Donald Ritchie, who I knew personally, by the way. And I'll talk to you about how, through Donald Ritchie, how I got involved in studying Japanese film. I'm not in Japanese film studies, okay? That's a uniquely specialized field within so-called film studies, and I don't make any claims of being part of that very small, tight clique. But I will tell you a secret about them. Most of them don't speak Japanese. How can you study Japanese film and don't know the language, or let alone read Japanese language? All right. I'll tell you a secret about Donald Ritchie, by the way. He's fluent in Japanese. He had an American accent. I'm not fluent in Japanese, so I'm not criticizing him. All right. But I found out only by hanging out with him that Donald Ritchie can't read Japanese at all. I mean, he could read, certain basic menus and whatnot, and the stop signs and things, but he can't really read any articles or even the daily newspaper. And he wrote for the Japan Times for most of his writing career, which I'll put that in quotation marks because, and I was old enough to kind of be hip to what goes on in the publishing world, academia. I was over there on a Fulbright scholarship, and the Fulbright is sponsored by the State Department. And if you're affiliated with the State Department, you're talking about propaganda, you're talking about diplomacy, you're talking about spies. So I encountered a lot of spies or spooks or agents or assets while I was living in Japan. And subsequently, many of them were Japanese, many of them were Okinawan, many of them were Korean, but most of them were Americans, right? You just assume that they have some sort of spook connection. That's what I do. Because after a while, I started to put things together. I started to run into the same people at certain events and see certain names, and I could kind of suss out, fill in the blanks, what they were trying to conceal. It's all, the white newscasters, the analysts like to talk about kabuki, right? They've never seen kabuki, and they've never been to Japan, but they'll talk knowledgeably about kabuki theater. Well, it's very theatrical, right? You don't know what role the person in front of you is playing. And that holds true for Donald Ritchie. I don't really know who he is, purposely so. And he knew that I don't know who he is, and he wasn't going to tell me. He was not going to take me into his confidence. And I understand that. but I still was able to suss out quite a bit from the few times, really, that I hung out with him. And I knew what his predilections were, and I was able to compare notes with other people who know him. All right. So anyway, he had a very close relationship as a consultant, I believe, with Criterion Films. Some of his own, he was a movie maker as well. He's a poet, movie maker, writer, essayist, cultural critic, musician. He was a composer. I don't think he could write a lick of music, but of course he couldn't read Japanese either. So being able to read music really didn't stop Lennon or McCartney, did it? So I'm not putting these criteria on him. I'm just saying he's a really multi-talented expatriate who had been lived by the time I first met him, he'd already living in Japan for about 60 years. And Donald Ritchie had been living in Japan since like 1946, 47, almost immediately after the surrender and the occupation of the U.S. military. And he came, and he told me this himself. Okay, and a lot of this is publicly known information. There's a lot written about Donald Ritchie in popular journals. There's scholarship. There's people who are trying to write his life story. They've done documentaries on him. He was interviewed left, right, center. And he even allowed me to interview him because I was approaching him as a Fulbright fellow. Okay, for those of you who don't know, that's a semi-State Department official emissary of the U.S. government in Japan. So he's going to treat me nice. Plus, he's an old school gentleman. Whenever I wrote him a short note or a letter, he would unfailingly respond to my queries, to my messages. He was old school, unfailingly. So I'm not criticizing him at all. I'm just trying to convey to you the layers of, I won't say play acting, but of dissemblance that takes place in the world of well, all the world, but my world in particular, of seemingly objective scholarship. Like, you would think, gee, how difficult could it be? It's only Godzilla. But already he's giving us a whole discourse on spycraft. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have to say something. It is that deep. And you know what? I like it that way. I always knew there was something more to, even when I was a stupid kid sitting on Saturday morning in my PJs watching Godzilla cut up in many different ways and seeing Raymond Burr, Ironsides, Perry Mason as being made the focus of the movie, not Dr. Serizawa, but Perry Mason. The Japanese people who are really in the Japanese version, the original version, are the focal point of the movie, of course. But in the American cut, it's Perry Mason. So I grew up thinking that Godzilla was about Ironsides, the big obese Perry, with Raymond Burr. That's his name, right? So that already tells you that when we're talking about a phenomenon like Godzilla, it already becomes nuanced, and there's already layers of dissemblance going on that you're not even aware of until later. I didn't know that there was an original Godzilla version until years and years later. And it wasn't even available in America unless you were a film scholar or a Donald Ritchie type person. You would not know that print even existed. All right. And at the same time, these days, 2026, I have to listen to these. They're like the pop-up pundits that you always hear me complaining about. They're self-proclaimed experts on Godzilla or Japanese popular. I know everything about J-pop. Just like whenever you go to a blues jam or you play with a bunch of guys, this is why I don't like to do it. There's always the guy who knows every single thing about the blues. And he's a white guy, of course, and he knows more about the blues than you do. It's just like Miles Davis tells the story, the great Miles Davis. Miles Davis told the story of how when he was at Juilliard He was studying music, classical music, right? The European tradition, the canon. One of his professors was telling him a little bit about jazz. He says, yeah, the jazz comes out of the blues. It comes out of oppression and extreme poverty and slavery. And Miles Davis said, hey, wait a minute, bitch. My daddy was one of the richest men in the state of Missouri, which is true. Not the richest black man, the richest man, whatever color. His father was this is Miles Dewey Davis. His father was a prosperous dentist. He owned a lot of land, a lot of property. Right. But he was telling you that, hey, I'm my history. I'm in the best position to tell you about my people, my experience, my music, my art. Right. And I'm making the same claim for myself. Now, that doesn't mean that I can produce a book like this, because I give this book high praise, 5 stars. It's by a guy named Steve Rifley. We're going to see him in action here at a conference. Because, yes, I wasn't kidding. There are Godzilla conferences, and it's not just the fanboys now. It's not just the guys wearing the Godzilla. It's not just cosplay. It's not just furries. It's a serious stuff. And I'm not saying it has to be dead serious on a scholarly, deadening level. I'm just saying, trying to establish for you or with you that this is worthy of your deep consideration in a second, third, fourth, and fifth level look and beyond. So this is a good place to start. It's called Ishiro Honda, A Life in Film from Gojira to Kurosawa. And I learned so much from this book. I just can't begin to say, oh, by the way, there's a foreword by my favorite Sicilian American director, Martin Scorsese. Okay, how come Martin Scorsese, Coppola, all them guys can proudly proclaim their Sicilian or Italian, Napolitano heritage, right? Well, how can they celebrate that? But some guys in the chat here will say, yeah, you should go back to Japan. Well, I'm here, baby, and I'm here to stay. You dig? Just like Dewey. Miles Davis said, you're full of shit. You think you know it? Think again. All right. By the way, I should tell you, one of I think he was the first guy who, on an academic, on a scholarly level, that means footnotes, citations, scholarly protocol, good research, right? Historical background, good bibliographies. The first person I had ever encountered who took Godzilla seriously on that level was himself Jewish. And I'll give him credit right now. His name's Jerome Shapiro. I met him over at UC Irvine. He was a dick, but I have to hand it to him. He landed on a really good topic. I wonder what he's thinking now when all these Johnny-come-latelys have kind of passed him by. But he was one of the first people to be writing about Godzilla in a serious fashion. And of course, I already told you that I was studying this type of phenomena, Japanese popular culture, particularly way back in 75, 76 at Bowling Green, right? So, well, we'll talk a little bit here and there about Honda's biographical contributions here, but for now, let's just say he is the person who directed Gojira. Honda. If you want to know his name, just think of the automobile. If you have a hard time remembering, right, his last name, because it's too alien for you to remember. Right? Believe me, I have that experience a lot of times. Let's just give me your first name. Because I can't be bothered to memorize your whole name. It's too difficult for me. So just think of Honda Ishiro. But this guy, gentleman, has my utmost, because I've been reading this, of course. This is the primary text for today's talk. I didn't realize that he was in the Japanese Imperial Army for a total of about 6 years. And this was 6 years in a young man's life who was already on an elite track, an exclusive track to become a filmmaker at Toho Studios, which I'll show you in a little bit. I visited Toho Studios. That was one of the experiences of a lifetime. And it was thanks to a friend who I met at one of these events. Right. Well, I'll tell you, I won't give his last name. I think he's still alive and kicking. He might not want his name mentioned, but he was the head finance guy at Toho Studios. And Toho Studio is on sort of the outskirts of central Tokyo. Seijo, I think, is the town. I took a train with him. He took me out there. Took many, many different local trains out. It seemed like forever to get there. So he gave me a personal tour. But he was the head accountant and bookkeeper for the whole studio. So he knew everybody. He knew the whole finances of the whole operation. He knew the president of the company all the way down. He knew everybody. But he had retired. And he was, or he is, emblematic of the Japanese corporate ethos and culture that we were reading about back in the 80s and into the 90s, when people were talking about how Japan was going to eat up America and buy up everything and take over. Remember that scare? Now it's the Chacoms who are supposed to be. The Yellow Peril's always in the background there, right? It's the same people who are always pointing to the yellow people to take the blame for what they're actually doing, like bringing in the opium, creating the opium, selling it, creating the atom bomb, the Central European expatriates who went into the Manhattan Project. Okay. These are all Sabbateans, right? These are people out of that Central European mystical tradition. They were working on nuclear physics. It's not an accident. It's not a coincidence, right? But that's a separate but related story, right? And I have visited the Trinity site in New Mexico, Alamogordo, right? I think I've told you about this before. So I've made my pilgrimages to all these death sites. And I lived outside of Hiroshima for a solid year. And I lived at the other end of Japan in Okinawa, where the last major land battle of the Pacific War, that's what they call it. They call it Taiheiyo Senso, the Greater Pacific War. We call it World War II. Japanese have a different term for it. Just like the Vietnamese people call their war against America the war against American imperial aggression. We call it the Vietnam War. That's another place I visited. I went to the Hanoi. I went to the war museums. I visited all the sites, right? I'm interested in these historical remnants. They're not remnants to me. They're living history. All right. So anyway, Honda had his Showa era. They're called. Showa is the period of Hirohito. He's known as Emperor Showa, right? The Showa era is named after him posthumously. It's called Showa. That's when Honda was making his films. And the reason why the eras are important to understand is because just like in America, the Japanese filmmakers like Honda had to exist under various regimes of political censorship. So when you're reading this about him as the censorship in the late 30s through the 40s through World War II, I'll use our term, World War II, in China, Manchuria, Manchukuo, domestic filmmaking at Toho Studios, and then the 50s, when the Americans came in for the occupation, you're going to see very similar parallels there. The supreme commander of Allied powers was Douglas MacArthur, and Douglas MacArthur under SCAP, that's the initials of it, had a bureau specifically for newspapers, publishing, and movies, films. And the type of films that were made and the content of those films were closely scrutinized and regulated. And Honda had to work under all those different regimes. And at the same time, he had spent, because he was drafted 3 separate times. Right. I was thinking about this earlier today. I said, just imagine all the times in my own career I was feeling sorry for myself. This break didn't happen. This didn't take place. I got fired from here. I got fired from there. No one wanted to hire me here, on and on. Woe is me, right? Okay. But this guy was in the Japanese Imperial military for a total of 6 years. He was drafted 3 separate times. He had already been put back into civilian life when he got his red notice again and was called back to go out into the battlefronts. He went to China. He went to Manchuria. I think it was China. And he wound up, by the way, for a year, this was like 1930, 43, 44, as a prisoner of war of the Chinese National Forces. And by the way, he didn't have a really wretched experience as I thought he might, but he said he was treated very well by the Chinese people. They were friendly towards him. They didn't really view him as the enemy as such. I think they viewed some of the warring Chinese parties as being more evil than the invading Japanese people. Right? There was a period of warlords. In fact, that was one of the reasons why Japan ostensibly went over there, because there was all this chaos going. They said, well, we're going to clean it up. Right? But he rarely talked. I'm talking about Honda now. Rarely talked about his overseas experience as a soldier. He didn't like it, but he kept his mouth shut. He did his job. Right, that is part of the Japanese corporate ethos too. He was perfect for Toho. You do your job. You have your position within the hierarchy, and you do the job to the best of your ability. Right, and that's not unique to Japan, but in the United States corporate culture, you're highly disposable. All right. Many of you who are watching this know what I'm saying. Either that or you're living in fear that whether you're going to make it to the retirement and whether your pension is going to be there, because Blackstone or BlackRock is going to abscond with your money. Right. So these so-called private equity companies. Anyway, I won't go down that road. So Honda had an incredible history, but at the same time, he was amongst a privileged few who were identified by the Toho company and probably by the government, state agencies. And he probably had prominent family members that were known to the decision makers. And he was brought in, I think he was at Nihon University. It's a prominent, even back then, private institution. And they had a budding, an early film studies program, film production, not film theory, but they're saying, oh yeah, let's look at the extended shots of Ozu Yasuhiro. Let's look at the Kurosawa, none of that stuff. It's like, how are we going to make movies? Or not, let's go on a fact-finding mission to Columbia Studios in Los Angeles and see how they're doing a certain project. They would do that. They would send people over and study. They'd go to France. They'd go to Germany. They'd look at the catalogs produced by Leica of the Sun Systems. They were really, really aggressive students of the film technology and art. So these are mostly the men. They're mostly, largely men. The women played a strong role, including his own wife, in the business, but it was mainly the men who were the directors. I don't know of a single film director who made it into that top, but they were recruited from the top universities. He was still sent out to the battlefield, but the company held his job for him while he was getting his ass shot at or being a POW. And he never complained. He never grumbled. The resentment never manifests itself in bitterness of the sort that you get to hear from me week in and week out. He was Japanese. He kept it inside. It's called gamang. It's like, you just grin and bear it. It's the British stiff upper lip, right? You've heard this. That's real. That used to be characteristic, by the way, of all cultures, especially American culture. The whinger, the whiny, the wimpy, complaining grievance culture that we're seeing today is an historical anomaly in American culture and society. I saw it change myself right from under me. Well, during my last years of teaching, the culture, the society was being re-engineered in that direction. So I'm giving you a basis of comparison here. And I think by reading these types of books, studying the lives, the travails, the hardships, as well as the accomplishments of people like Honda Ishiro, through the access point of something silly like Gojira or Masora or Ghidorah, I think we're going to come out for the better. Don't you? I think you will. You're going to start looking at these movies in a different way. Just like someone told me in a comment of last week, he said, "Well, I'm never going to be able to watch the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers in quite the same way." Right? That's what I do. My whole goal in popular culture studies and cultural forensics is to take something seemingly mundane, innocuous, and undistinguished, and then probe and dig into it and peel back the deep cultural, historical, existential, biographical layers and say, wow, isn't humanity beautiful? I think Honda lived, I think he was in his late 80s or 90s before he died, and he went through hell. All right, so one of my big takeaways is for me to stop being such a big complainer or not to feel sorry for myself. All right, so let's take a look at how Criterion Films has been packaging, because there's huge interest now, enough interest where it's going to make money for Criterion, right? There's huge interest in Godzilla studies, or sometimes it's called kaiju. Kaiju. Dai is big monster movies. And again, think beyond the fanboy level. Don't be a weeb. All right. My Little Pony, don't be a brony, right? Don't be a furry. You notice the people who are watching my show and weaponizing my insights and saying, oh, yeah, this guy here belongs to a furry cult. I did those shows a long time ago, by the way. They're watching my show and figuring out how to weaponize Professor Hamamoto's observations, right? I, I'm trying to train you how to see through all the different flack that's being put out there to distract you. Oh yeah, Tyler Robinson was a furry. Yeah, tell us, lay it out for us, Megan Kelly. Yeah, come on. Jimmy Dore. Yeah, Sean, what's the guy? The guy that he's a cool ex-Navy SEAL. He's the tattooed wonder. Sean Ryan. Yeah, or the Latino dude, right, with the headband on. All these guys that are flooding the zone, right? Here's how Criterion is repackaging and reintroducing the Criterion series of the kaiju movies of the Showa era Toho Studios. Okay, I'll be back with you. in a moment. Here we go. That's a promo, a trailer. It's all the films have been digitally remastered. I think it's like 4K, something like that. It's definitely Blu-ray. But I must make a confession to you. I don't have a 4K player. I'm going to invest in one. I'm kind of shopping around for it. I think now is the time because you have all these restorations and these reissues. Now's the time for me to upgrade my hardware so that I can watch these films and study them intently. All right. Now, I'm still going to buy some of the old regular. This is a big revolution itself, DVDs. But I need to up my game, and I'll take this opportunity to thank my patrons because you're the ones who are providing me the funds that enable me to buy books like this and really steep myself into it and get the DVDs and the material required in order to put these presentations together. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're on a upswing so far as the larger cultural forensics, let's call it, effort is concerned. We're moving in that direction in general. And this is a direction that myself, my colleagues, and my predecessors have been pushing for 40 years now, or more, probably more, longer than that, right? To the point where we went to go meet and go examine the sites where these productions were taking place, including Toho Studios, which is now, I haven't been there in years, but it's now a tourist. It's not like Universal Studios, don't get me wrong, but it's a place where people make ordinary people who are into Godzilla, weeaboos, anybody, or serious film scholars. They make a pilgrimage to go to Seijo to visit the studios, and it's really deluxe now. It's quite different than when I was there. In fact, when I went to the studios, I told you I knew a guy who was a lifetime. He was a career employee of Toho Studio. By the way, Japanese corporate style. He was telling me about how he started. He started at Toho cleaning the toilets. This is how, in the old days, even in American industry or whatever it was, or the film business, you start, or in the recording studios, you start sweeping up or organizing film, whatever. You're doing really what people coming out of college they would consider to be menial work. And he came out of the University of Tokyo, by the way, and he was cleaning toilets. And it wasn't a humiliation. It wasn't like a fraternity hazing or anything, but it's to instill a certain attitude. But you got to know everything from how the toilets are properly maintained to filmmaking and bringing them to worldwide release. Now, that's the type of corporate culture that America has lost. We had it not too long ago. Within my living memory, that's not an alien concept. So when I saw that for myself with my own eyes, this is why you got to go to these places. It was a revelation because everybody in America who in the business schools, this is when there was a big MBA fad going on, masters of business, because they wanted to get rich on Wall Street. They were trying to study the secrets of Japanese management. There were all these books, and I read all those books too. But it goes very deep to the way the society and culture is organized pre-capitalist, right? And one site stuck with me quite clearly. I told you this was going to be highly autobiographical. One site stuck with me to this very day is that I went there, and it was during lunchtime at Toho. Everybody eats at the same time in a giant cafeteria, and I've seen college and university cafeterias today that are much fancier than the ones you see at Toho or other Japanese company. The food's much better in the Japanese setting, but in the universities, they have, the taco bar, the limitless self-serve, soft serve ice cream, and all the treats from home, right? But anyway, it's a cafeteria, and it's kind of Spartan, but it's all the good, nutritious food is there for everybody. Everybody eats at the same time. So I was walking in there, and my host introduced me to the president, who was waiting in line with a tray of food. He had a little piece of tofu here and maybe some bowl of ramen with a boiled egg on top. I don't know what his menu was. Maybe he had, a bowl of rice here, some gyoza. He was just eating the corporate salary man. They call him salary man. It's a white collar worker lunch, and he was eating with everybody else. So I got to meet him, and he meets everybody, right? He's the head of the studios, which was astounding for starters. I didn't have to go to Mama Song to the best table and say, yeah, I'm with Michael Ovitz, I'm with Creative Artists Agents, and I want a table here in the front so everybody sees what a big macher I am. No, he was eating in the cafeteria with everybody else. And that sends out a very strong signal of the corporate ethos there. And did he take his table and leave and go to a private eating area? No, he ate with everybody else. He had his assistants with him. They were talking business. But he was eating with everybody in the same room. And I said, wow, that's amazing. I told my host, I said, I said, you would never see that in an American corporation. And they say Japanese society. This is the people who are studying Japanese management. People are studying Japan to figure out the Japanese growth miracle. So, yeah, it's a real hierarchical society. Everybody knows this place. I said, wow, American corporate culture is very hierarchical, and you can't cross the line. But Japanese corporations is completely opposite. So, those are little lessons right there. I also, but since we're on the Godzilla theme here, the topic of Godzilla, I saw the pond. It was a man-made pond on this set, the production studio. They just keep it maintained there. And I was told that it was that same pond where all the miniatures were floated, and they were used in the first Godzilla movie and subsequent ones. But that was supposed to be the water, the ocean, the sea. It was that pond there. I go, wow, it's great. But then I saw a little sign, because we're in Japan, right? I saw a sign stuck on the lawn warning people. The sign said, no fishing. You had to have been there, I guess. I don't know. Japanese people love fish. Okay, go figure. They're surrounded by water. The ocean is their supermarket, right? They don't have Kroger's or Costco or Gigantor or us. They don't go shopping with a giant forklift, over at Sam's Club or whatever it is. But it's a different world altogether. Quite amusing. So yeah, no fishing. By the way, I also went to an aquarium down in Okinawa on the other side of the island. Probably the biggest one with a continuously cast glass panel in the world. I forgot the name of it. I think it's Chuarumi Aquarium. It's world famous, but I visited there, and you had all the tropical fish floating by. And there was this one kid, he's probably 5, 6 years old, seeing the fish swim by, and he goes, "Oishiso," in the child's voice. And that translates to, that looks good. Like, I want to eat that. I thought that was pretty funny. You had to have been there, supposedly. Okay, so let me show you just very quickly some of the, and this is what I learned, much to my delight, about Honda's pre-Godzilla films. Right, Godzilla was his first major earning film, but he had done movies before, and a lot of them had sort of a documentary feel to them. He considered himself a quote-unquote serious filmmaker. You might think Godzilla, Mothra, he didn't do all those movies, though. In fact, he refused to do the second Godzilla movie. You may think it's kitschy and cheesy and all that stuff, but But believe me, Honda and all those people who were involved with it, the special effects people, the musicians, the orchestrators, and the actors, they took it dead seriously. All right. And again, I'm telling you this because we need to rescue Godzilla from the weebs, from the newbies, from the Godzilla groupies who are looking at that from the toy level. Okay. And okay, we're not just talking about Godzilla, we're talking about our own society. We have to look at Furby through a little bit more critical lens. We have to look at Labubu a little bit more closely. We have to break down what Lego really means, which I did 5 years ago on this channel. It didn't even get 2,000 views. And now we're getting very sophisticated political propaganda from Iran, supposedly using the Lego motifs. You see what I'm saying here? Cultural forensics is very, very useful, very practical, and you could probably make a fortune if you knew how to apply them and put it into play or monetize it, as they say, as the cliche goes. I should be out there with you trying to make a buck off of it, but no, I'm not really interested. I'm just interested in going to visit Toho Studios, flying to Tokyo, walking around, visiting with Donald Ritchie, having some tea with him, having lunch at the Foreign Correspondents Club, interviewing people, getting to know individuals, trying to figure out who's the spook, who's the spy, who's ratting on me, who's following me around, who's trying to honeypot me or honey trap me, who's trying to embrace me like a Jesuit. I found out that was going on. It took me. I didn't realize that about 10 years ago. I was being Jesuited down in Okinawa. Figured it out. Just certain chance remarks. People let it slip. Didn't say, "Well, I'm a Jesuit," but they would indicate. They would give me some indication that I was under observation. That I was being observed very closely and followed, and more importantly, insulated, making sure that I wasn't talking to people that they did not want me to potentially collaborate with or meet or talk or exchange information. Seal me off. Okay, that's an important propaganda function, by the way, that I think we can all benefit by. It's not just disinformation, it's not misinformation, not just lies, but it's also a process of encirclement and divorcement or containment. It's a strategy of containment. That's a Cold War term, by the way. It's a very important function. And I had those type of people around me, and I had to always think, right? And by the way, that it exists today. It's not something that I left behind, right? And it's not unique to me. It's being done to you, right? At all different levels and all different, you've heard of the flock cameras. I'm not just talking about that. I'm talking about human intelligence that's on your ass. Okay. I'm not trying to make you paranoid. I'm just trying to have you understand how societies actually operate, how they work. Beneath the rhetoric of freedom and constitutional rights that Tucker Carlson tries to pretend still exists here in American society. Tucker Carlson is going to protect us from falling into totalitarianism. Excuse me. So here's a quick example of one of the pre-Godzilla films of Honda. It's called Ise Shima. It's the great. I have never visited the shrine, the Ise Shrine. And it's a sacred. It's a national treasure. But here it is.
三重県の東南にある伊勢志摩地方は陸地が陥没してできた変わった地形のところで、その昔谷間であったところが入り江や湾になっている。そのために総面積の8割4分が山で、耕すことのできる土地はわずかに1割6分にしか過ぎなかった。
Well, you get the idea. It's still very much a documentary mode that he's working in. This is still a time of reconstruction in Japan, and also these films like this that were being produced. I don't know if this is a Toho. I think it was a Toho. I saw the logo in front. But it was definitely being supervised by SCAP, by the Washington bureaucrats that had been placed within the film industry to make sure there was no resurgence in militaristic thought or communist ideology was being promoted. By the way, I should tell you that this book covers it, not exhaustively, but it does talk about the huge labor and political disputes that racked the film studios, including Toho, in the 40s. A lot of the talent left as a result. A lot of the directors were kicked out. It's kind of, I'm not going to draw the comparison with the blacklist in America in the 1950s, but it's something along those lines. But it was probably even worse because, like I told you, I was talking about Japanese corporate culture. If you've been fired from a Japanese company or you can't move around from company to company. Your organization is who you are and your identity. And once you fall off the track, you're off the track. But anyway, that point is not made in this book. This is just my own observation. But there was a lot of political tension that was kept out of these little short films. I'll show you one more in a moment. And the reason why that's important for us is because these political tensions are impossible to repress. You can try, but it's going to slip out somehow. It's going to slip out in coded language, a metaphor, a poetic lapse, or something that'll slip by the censor, either deliberately or accidentally. It's like repression, just like when you do a slip of tongue. You meant to say one thing and you say something else, but your slip of tongue is probably more accurate what you're really feeling, right? Freud did a whole essay on this. You're familiar with the repressed psychological repression. Well, it's the same way with the film, very similar. So these directors, people like Honda, were very skilled in not externalizing visibly, vocally, their dissent. He was profoundly anti-war, for example. All through the war, he never uttered one disloyal word about his unit, his country, his emperor, or to the military. Never once. He never expressed any bitterness to it. But he was profoundly anti-war, and it shows up in his movies, including Godzilla. You understand? It's called The Return of the Repressed. The repressed cannot be repressed. And why is that important for the discussion today? Is because no matter how much censorship comes down on us, we Americans in 2026, we're not going to be repressed. We're not going to be held down. It's going to come out. It's going to come out on the Professor Hamamoto channel through his puns, his jokes, his sarcasm, his irreverence. his routines, his stream of consciousness, his flow, his stories. And I'm just one person. All right. So these characters who are working for Israel, the censors, they can try all they want, but they're a huge disadvantage. They don't know our language. They don't know our culture. Maybe Ben Shapiro thinks he does, but um, or Mark Levin or one of their assets, or Harvey Weinstein, whoever these characters are. But even then, it's like a beach ball that you try to hold under the water. It always pops up. So let's take another look before we move on to the heart of this talk here. It's called Eagle of the Pacific. It's a post-military film on the Japanese military. And it's I think it was edited, it was subtitled in a Spanish language country. I don't know if it's Mexico, if it's España, where, I don't know where it is. There's your Toho. That's Shimura Takashi. He was a favorite of Kurosawa, the director. He's also in Gojira. You'll recognize his face.
今さら誰がいいの悪いのといったところで始まらぬ話です。個人としての意見と正確に正反対の決意を固め、その方向に一途邁進のほかなき現代の立場は誠に変なものです。これも名というものか。
Well, you get the flavor of it. I haven't seen this film. I'd like to get a hold of this one. This is something that Criterion or some other company, I hope they do. They hope they restore these prints and then reissue them, subtitle them, have maybe commentary from film experts, historians, cultural historians, and the one Ame. It's about the Ama, the pearl divers, I guess they're called. A film that Honda pioneered using underwater photography, which was a technical achievement. There's so many contributions. I mean, I don't even have time to get into it. But these types of films were not shown widely amongst the public. The domestic dramas were emphasized in the occupation government of Japan, overseen by SCAP, the United States occupation. They did not want any trace of militarism or militaristic warrior culture. If you had films, it's called the Jidai Geki, the samurai films with the swords and all, those were proscribed. They were prohibited because it conjured up an early era of Japanese militarism until I think past 52, it started to loosen up. So anyway, like I told you, Honda was trained and grew up under these different regimes of censorship. Now, this is where someone like Donald Ritchie comes in as a very important mediator because he's American by nationality. He comes in as a very important mediator between the goals of post-war American Pax Americana, Cold War Japan, that particular relationship. And that battle, that struggle was going to be fought out in the realm of the popular culture. Do you understand? I don't think they use the term necessarily. Today, the people who theorize this refer to this as soft diplomacy, right? The toys, the movies, the literature, the K-pop, that's all part of soft diplomacy. Soft diplomacy is what reversed the highly, highly negative image of Japan in the world society, especially in America. We were trained by these propaganda movements, including myself, by the way, like I told you, to the point where we had to go to our own movie theaters, the Toho La Brea, to see Japanese movies. That's how I was able to escape Jewish Hollywood, by going to see Japanese movies in LA by an owned and operated theater owned by the Toho Studios, where they showed their own movies. And I saw all the classics because they were making great movies at that time. And there was also the Kokusai, who featured Dai and Shochiku, different movies. Those are all gone now. The buildings are still there, but now the Korean Christian Church or something, because the Japanese American or the Nikkei community has diminished quite substantially. Like they were forced to assimilate, move out marry, gone. Their businesses, livelihoods, they had to go and endure this process of demobilization throughout that. But I do remember through the 50s and parts of the 60s where that film-going culture was robust and it was part of our community life, the Nikkei community. All right, so it wasn't just Martin Scorsese and Coppola. Those guys came to my films, the ones that I grew up, only until they were adults and going to USC or NYU, watching it in the classroom. I grew up with this as part of my daily life. Big difference. Because I got to see human yeller people, not these characters shown in Jewish Hollywood, right? I used to call it white Hollywood, and I have to call a spade, right? This is what it was. This was their charge. This is what the people in DC said. Okay, if you want to join WASP Society, if you want to live in the Hamptons with us, if you want to marry our daughter, Ivanka Trump, and then this is what you have to do to the yeller people. And they said, okay, we're there. We'll do it. I'm simplifying right there. So this is where Donald Ritchie comes in. He, I could spend a whole hour talking about his fascinating biography, but he's from the Middle West, and he had, what can I properly say about him that gives him his respect, his recognition, which he already enjoys, really, but doesn't denigrate him, because he was he had a shadow self, shall we say, that most people never saw. I got to see it because he recognized in me as someone who was not a threat. I was not a white journalist or a white author. I was not a CIA agent. I was a yeller kid. I was a grad student, so he knew I was green. No, I wasn't a grad. I had a PhD already. I was already teaching. So he just thought I was some harmless academic type, clueless academic type, which, I understand, So he told me a lot of stuff that he normally would not share with other people. But he also recognized a fellow, in Japanese, it's called itch, or itch. And that means someone who's slightly perverted. Etch culture, tsukube, Sukebe Jisang, like a dirty old man type deal, right? Not really deviant, but I don't know how far he went with it. But I was interested, and the reason why he probably got it because I was always interested in the seedy side of life, the dark side of life. I wasn't buying all these romantic comedies that were being pumped out by Hollywood in 30s and 40s. I knew there was a Hollywood Babylon beneath it, even as a kid, because my dad would tell me that. Remember, he worked for the screenwriter. He worked in Hollywood. He would tell me stuff. He was also a Freemason. He knew all their secrets. So he would tell me, and so I was getting educational, watching this stuff on TV. My head was telling me, well, this is bullshit. This is bullshit. This is bullshit. Then I was also going to the Toho La Brea and seeing my fellow yellows in an unadulterated, even heroic position, like a Dr. Sarazawa, not Raymond Burr. Okay. So Donald Ritchie's charge, I haven't really fully figured it out yet. I've written about this. This book has not been published yet, but I've put it down on paper so I can work out my thoughts. But his charge, because he came to Japan as a civilian contractor, a worker, 1947, something like that. Went to work for the Japan Times. Didn't work for intelligence that I could tell. He worked for the military a little bit. He might have worked for the military intelligence and then went civilian. But he was an intelligence asset of some sort, living long-term in Japan for decades and decades and decades. And through the course of that, he became an expert in the number one expert, not just a expert, but the number one expert in English language in Japanese cinema. Him and a guy named Donald Anderson co-authored a first book I ever read on Japanese cinema. Donald Ritchie, Donald Anderson. I think Anderson was probably CIA. But Ritchie, I could never really pin him down on that. He wouldn't really get into that part of it. But it was through Ritchie that I found out about Kurosawa, who is now an icon, right? The whole Star Wars series was inspired. It was a ripoff from Kurosawa. George Lucas would be the first to acknowledge that. All those guys, Spielberg and even Quentin Tarantino, the world's oldest fanboy, he talks, he's a second generation. He loves these movies, right? They don't like the people, but they like the movies about using the people, the spirit, sucking out and putting it into their movies at the same time, effacing us or leaving out of us or putting some kind of racial hybrid out there, like a Keanu Reeves. That's about as close as we're going to get in these movies, realistically. That's why I'm looking for investors from Japan and from China and from South Korea for my own yen project, Yellow Entertainment Network. You got it? That's the only way it's going to happen. Anyway, Donald Ritchie was one of the guys sent in to kind of moderate and mediate and explain, because this is all new. This is before the internet. This is before people were studying Japanese. This is before Japan became cool. They were still the hated enemy. So he was doing some soft diplomacy on the part of the government. He also had some connection with academic institutions like Columbia University and others. He was always getting invites, chairs, and honorary recognition from Blake. He was never an academic, but he was always being courted by the academic world. So here is a glimpse of Donald Ritchie, who I hope you will start investigating as an artist in his own right, as a filmmaker, as a poet, as a journalist, as an essayist, as a cultural critic, because he's certainly an historian, and he certainly inspired me. For better or for worse, he inspired me.
Naおい、広いもんじゃな、東京は。
そうですな。
うっかりこんなとこではぐれでもしたら一生涯探しても私ゃあせんよ。
日本人たちがもうこれはもっと日本的な監督ないということをしているんですね。それは確かにそうです。本当にこれ一番日本的な歩みでね、監督と思うんですがね。ところがね、アメリカ的とか日本的とか英国的、本当に深くなると国際的になっちゃうんですよ。東京物語とか晩春爆秋見るとね、本当に理解することできます。本当にやっぱり私たちよくわかる人間だということですね。その下には人間のものは気持ちはほとんど同じ、考え方違うかもわかんないけど、気持ちほとんど同じです。
Was Donald Ritchie many, many years ago. You can see his criticism comes from a position of liberal humanism. We're all the same people emotionally. Externally, it might be seem a little different, but see, that was his role to say we're all human beings. Now, I disagree with that. I think people, Japanese or whoever else, they fundamentally view and experience and live the world different from maybe other groups, and it'd be a mistake to assume this sort of liberal humanist universality amongst them. Anyway, that's a quibble. The point is, I wanted to show you that he's fluent in Japanese. He's got an American accent, but he invested his energies into understanding a society, a culture that was a complete mystery to 99% of Americans. If you can imagine that, because this Japan became an economic giant, and it's been dormant for the last 20 years or more, but a cultural force and a huge economy, right? We know that by now, but this is early days when Donald Ritchie, so they were doing these Japanese cinema, were doing these personalistic films like Tokyo Story. And that's why Ozu, which Ritchie wrote a classic book on Ozu Yasujiro, and it's still referred to today. It's been in print for, I don't know, 20 years or so. It's still, it's available. You have to look, but you also have to get the movies to understand where he's going with it. Brilliant. That's Donald Ritchie, and I'm proud to say that I got to meet him because I think I alluded to this already. I got a Fulbright fellowship to teach at Hiroshima University. I don't think I'm going to get to that point today where I went to Hiroshima, but one of my first stops when I arrived in Japan was because I arrived first at Tokyo, was to stop in on Donald Ritchie. I had written him previously to pay my respects to him, bring a copy of his book, Japanese Cinema, and have him autograph it. And I still have the book, of course, and to express to him my gratitude for him being my sensei, my teacher. And of course, I'm just one of probably dozens, scores of people who worshipped and admired Donald Ritchie. But that's what you do. You go and you meet the master. You meet the sensei. That's what I did. And I'm going to leave it at that. You know, I could tell you some very funny stories about him and shed a little bit more a light on his character that he kept private. And I told you he let me in on his secret life. I'll just leave it at this. He was in Japan for a very important reason. When he came to Japan in 46, 47, you could be thrown in prison for being homosexual in America, right? The sexual mores were quite different when he was a young man. And also through the 50s and parts of the 60s, it started changing, right? And of course, gay rights, gay liberation, but this is pre-gay liberation. The only place where he could live out his sexual fantasies and the full expression of his gay sexuality, and he didn't refer to himself as gay. He didn't really recognize this term homosexual, Ritchie. He believes that sexuality is more ambiguous and fluid. But the only place he could do that safely without recriminations, exposure, or censure, and still make a living and going about living his life the way he wanted to was in Tokyo. Got it? So there's all kinds of strange personal, not strange, but different personal reasons why people get into it this way. But I don't think anybody's really uh, looked at Donald Ritchie. I hope someone who's a film scholar is watching this, or a person who's interested in Donald Ritchie or Japanese film studies, you're watching this. No one's really done any essay, any work about Donald Ritchie as a gay man, as a gay intellectual artist and scholar living in Japan at a really pivotal moment in modern Japanese history. Because you could extend this further to include a wider network of Japan hands or Japanophiles. These were the guys that were translating literature, translating Mishima Yukio, who, by the way, also was homosexual, right? He was a brilliant novelist, filmmaker, right-wing nationalist ideologue. Donald Ritchie, in one of his books, writes about how he met up with Mishima at a bar, a high-end Tokyo bar, and Mishima was trying to set him up with a boy. He didn't do it. I mean, Ritchie leaves it ambiguous. He's not a social realist type writer. He's more of a French impressionistic or Japanese style aesthetic writer. I'm talking about Donald Ritchie here. So those are the type of people he was hanging out with. He was telling me these stories that he was living himself. That's how I found out a little bit more about his sexuality. But he told me that all these names that I grew up, people reading, their books, their criticism, their translations, they are all gay. They were all homosexual men, and they all were in Japan for the same reason. The boys. Later on, some of the weeaboos, they started going there for the girls, but the initial ones were coming in with intelligence. Probably the military men, officers, they were probably into boys, right? You know the guy that got fired from MIT, right? What's his name? Ito? Joichi Ito. He's one of those guys, by the way. He was found in Kabukicho in Tokyo. He was like one of those low level rent boys, you'd call him. That's Joichi Ito. He wound up running MIT Media Lab. He was big friends with Jeffrey Epstein. This was Donald Ritchie's world too. Okay, I'm sure he knew Joichi Ito. I didn't know who Ito was back then, but there was probably a lot of people that that we knew in common. So, and I kind of got a glimpse of that nether world, the underworld. It's called the Mizu Shobai, the water trade, the demi-monde, the underworld, that type of. I'm interested in that. Right. That's also within my bailiwick of cultural forensics. I look at the dark, seedy side of life. That's where all the deals, that's where all the excitement, that's where all the innovation takes place in these margins in the underground. So Donald Ritchie, if you understood him in that light, you're going to have a completely different understanding of his larger contribution to Japanese studies. Anyway, that's enough for now. So far as Ritchie is concerned, because I can go on and that, and I'm going to save a lot of this for my book, which I've had a hard time placing. I think the time is right to get it published. Now, I'm glad really that I got rejected from everybody, editors and publishers, and I got really disparaging, hostile, as well as just non-commit, type of reaction to my work. But I think the world has caught up with cultural forensics and with Professor Hamamoto. In the post-Epstein world, I think the world is better able and equipped to understand the real agenda of Professor Hamamoto and what he's been studying for years and years and years, but no one would listen to him because you'd only listen to him if it was coming from Donald Ritchie or some guys who are weeaboos or Godzilla fanboys. Then you'd listen. As long as you discovered sushi, then I could eat sushi. So far as you think Japan is cool, then you'll say, well, I'm copying you. No, you got it twisted. You got it backwards. The blues, just like in the case of Miles Davis, it starts with me, not the other way around. Okay. So before we move into that, let's take a little look of the incredible attention that Honda is now receiving amongst the fanboys. These guys are more than fanboys, but I think I give them my highest respect as scholars and researchers. But I'm talking about the guys who are into Godzilla memorabilia, those guys. And they don't want to talk about how Godzilla is a repressed expression of Honda's revulsion against war and his profound love of all humanity and animals, including Godzilla, who came to the surface because his habitat was destroyed by American atomic bomb testing, hydrogen bombs. It's a profoundly pacifistic film if you understand it from that perspective. But if you look at it as a fanboy, as a weeaboo who says, oh, I'm into Godzilla, a lot of them are gay too, by the way. Just like Richie, and it's kind of like a requirement. You have to be gay in order to like My Little Pony, Labubu, or Lego, whatever. It's a sensibility because we're outside, or monsters. Gays are into kaiju very much. American gays are into kaiju because, from what I've read, it's because they themselves feel like they're misunderstood monsters in the dominant homophobic society. They feel like Frankenstein amongst the village people who are coming at them with pitchforks and torches. Well, you can relax now. You won, right? You've taken over the castle. You run the world. Okay, Gay Power and Gay Pride Month is now a year. It now runs every day of the year. Congratulations. Look where America is now. It's not your fault. It's the weak people who succumbed and acquiesced to it. It's your fault. It's my fault. It's our fault. I only take partial blame for it because, believe me, I took on the gay mafia and the lesbian mafia in the stronghold where it was most well established, the university. Okay. And it was way before these Johnny come latelys you see on Tube You who are critiquing theory and gay theory and DEI. Those guys are way behind the curve. By the way, I have some new insights that I'll be sharing with you to leave those people in the dust to talk about issues that have been put to bed 10 years ago. Anyway, here's some insight into these authors here, Ryle and Godzilla-Industrial. Those are the authors, Rifle and Godzilla-Industrial. I think they're both American nationality, and I assume their language is good enough where they can read journal articles in Japanese and newspapers. But they've obviously interviewed a lot of people. So this is a very recent event. It's a tribute to Honda.
There you are. Thanks, Steve.
Of course. Well, since this is the first night of the festival, I definitely want to talk a bit about Ichiro Honda, but let's maybe start with the film we just saw. I think seeing it on the big screen, it's, I think the miniatures are just, and the sets, probably the Toho and Honda and Tsuburaya at their peak. I mean,
That's kind of what I often say about this film. This is Honda and Tsuburaya at the peak of their powers.
mhm.
It's one of the bigger budget films in the genre that they worked on. One of my favorite things, we were talking about this in the lobby, and it's a real brief moment in the film, but that if you caught it, there's this sort of spectacular shot where the helicopter, the SDF helicopter, flies past the Tokyo Tower, and the camera kind of tracks the movement of the helicopter, and you see this glorious miniature rendition of Tokyo from the sky, and it's really, it gives me a little bit of a chill. You know, it's so well done. And
So you can see what's happening. They're already depoliticizing the subtext of Gojira, as Honda himself has stated many, many times, and the more serious critics. And they're already making it into like a gay fanboy type of phenomenon, Gojira. Like I told you, most of you guys are gay. It's just like God. It's like Donald Ritchie and all these translators in English who went over there in hordes. That continuity is there. So we owe them, on one hand, for the great gay research they've done. But you have to understand, in the book, you know, they talk about the politics a little bit more. But you have to understand that they're talking to a different audience. They're talking about Godzilla as being an expression of gay identity, gay empowerment, maybe gay female feminist identity. There's that kind of nonsense being written, not them particularly, but there's all kinds of nonsense that has been coming out of academia. So this is another one of the reasons why I'm trying to re-represent Honda in a way that is currently being lost from what I can tell. Here's another example just to show you the level of respect and seriousness that Honda Ishiro is given by not just fans, but by serious critics. We'll take another look here.
僕なんだから、女性映画の方の、の制作人の一人として、まあ、監督になってた、ね、考えてたらしい。通常はゴジラが、
これは本田監督の私物で。
Yes, I thought it was important to get the Japanese perspective. They have obviously a different take on what Honda Ishiro represents to them. They seem more consistent with their own Japanese national cinema, Japanese, as opposed to fanboy, Gojira, weeaboo cinema, which is where it's being taken. And Toho is partly responsible for that, the people who are licensing all the T-shirts and the toys and all that. But there's enough material out there so that we can understand it in a much more deeply political context, the context of World War II, of the imminent nuclear war that might be taking place in Iran, in that part of the world, we don't know, or other acts of nuclear terrorism, as we saw in the case of Fukushima. So here's another example of the fanboy approach to Godzilla studies.
Hello everyone and welcome to our panel today. I just apologize for some of the switching around that we've done, but we're glad you're here to hear a little about Ishiro Honda, and I'll let the gentleman to my left introduce themselves. But first, my name is Nick Adam Poling. I have a YouTube channel called The Monster Report. Check it out on YouTube. Do a search for Nick Adam or Monster Report, monsterreport.com also with one R, and check out some of the shows that we have, interviews, anything kaiju related. And well, on with the introductions.
Hi guys, I'm Chris Olio. I've been working and helping out at GFest here for the last 10 years or so. I'm a filmmaker by trade and recently have been producing the Godzilla comics that we've been having. And
Scott Jastrzewski, editor and publisher of Japanese Giants magazine, and working on what I hope will be released next year with Sunny Rifle, a biography of Ishiro Honda.
And exactly the title of that will be?
That the publisher actually hasn't decided which title they want to go with.
Okay.
So
there's a few out
I'm not
there.
going to say exactly what the title is, but
okay, that gives you kind of a flavor of what takes place at these comic conventions or kaiju. It's a lot of YouTubers, right? I talk about the pop-up pundits. There's a lot of pop-up pundits in the kaiju. It's now cool to like a Godzilla. I couldn't even see it in the film theater. I had to look at Raymond Burr when I was a kid, and now these guys are like, this is our world now. Okay, but I'm establishing my claim to this very important legacy of Godzilla. Now, unfortunately, I don't have enough time to take us down to the second leg of my evolution in my study of Japanese popular culture, because after I hit Tokyo for the first part of my fellowship with the U.S. State Department with Fulbright, I went south and I lived in Hiroshima for a year, right? At a town outside of that famed location that's known the world over. Don't have time to talk about it today. I mean, that was part of the original plan, but I went on and on, perhaps a little too long, a little bit too much detail about Donald Ritchie for us to get to that point. Maybe some other time. I'll look forward to that, because it's the Hiroshima experience that I had for that 1 year, and then 10 years later, down in Okinawa, where the Battle of Okinawa was fought, 200,000 civilians killed, right? These are very important formative moments, experiences in my life as a researcher, as a person in cultural forensics, right? So if nothing else, you know that I'm more than a fanboy, and you know that I will never be invited to any of these panels, nor do I want to. And I'm not ever going to be. I might go to a Comic-Con one day, just for laughs, to see the people dressed up in monster uniforms and furries and fuzzies and whatever that might be, right? Because that's been weaponized, as you say. Maybe Godzilla will be brought out of mothballs, and he'll make a return visit to Washington, D.C. Anyway, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for indulging me on this Saturday afternoon. I'll be back with you next Sunday, God willing. I will have a special. I haven't really established a firm date on that, but I'll have a guest on fairly soon who many of you know, and I'll have some other fascinating announcements, updates on my explorations in cultural forensics. And I thank you very much for your support, your attention in bringing this method, this theory and method to the fore for serious discussion, rather than to abandon serious inquiry to weeaboos and fanboys and pop-up pundits and retooled comedians. All right. And also Johnny-come-lately academics, right? Who for them, New World Order studies and popular culture, that's their hobby. That's what we call a hobby. See, their main gig is teaching biochemistry or biology, whatever it is. But as a hobby in academia, each person gets to teach a class that they think will be cool and fun to do. So they take a popular culture class. They'll develop a course in Godzilla or something like that. All right. You understand that it's much deeper than that. And I hope you understand that Professor Hamamoto is quite different from the hobbyists that you're beginning to see showing up on TubeView. I stake my claim. All right. Peace out, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Bye.